I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Amy Hawkins. Amy's here from the University of Central Arkansas with a very apt presentation on how crisis leadership creates opportunities for university teaching establishments now and in the future. Just before Amy starts, just a reminder that if you wanted to hear from the Lawrence Field Centre for Entrepreneurship, please scroll to the top of the agenda and click track 2 or track 3 to join feedback groups in the Tech Lab. But now over to you, Dr. Amy Hawkins. Thank you so much for joining us and very excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and really just to share the story of our campus response to a global pandemic and how that transformed actually what we do in terms of teaching and learning. So I want you to imagine, and I'm going to go ahead and give you a little context here. I want you to imagine the University of Central Arkansas, just for our global partners, is located in the state of Arkansas in the Mid-South of the United States. We are a state public university and have about 11,000 students, primarily undergraduate. We also offer master's and doctoral programs. We have about 550 full-time faculty and around 100 part-time faculty. So imagine, if you will, I'm going to take us back, although I hate to do so emotionally, to late February, early March 2020. And imagine getting a phone call from the Provost, the Executive Vice President for Academics, who tells me that the virus that we're hearing about on the news is expected to not just affect the United States, but ultimately shut down the operations of the United States nationally. And then imagine leading a team of 3 instructional designers, because in our Center for Teaching Excellence, there's myself and 3 instructional designers who need to now pivot an entire campus to fully online instruction in less than 1 week. And that is exactly what we did. And you have to understand that we are a residential undergraduate campus primarily. The vast majority of our faculty teach almost exclusively face-to-face prior to COVID-19. And then to make it even more interesting, at least half to 2/3 of the faculty at UCA were not familiar. I put deeply familiar, but they were not really even marginally familiar with our campus learning management system, which in our case is the system known as Blackboard. In fact, nearly 1/3 of the faculty on our campus, particularly in the areas of the liberal arts and STEM, had never even logged into Blackboard. With every aspect of the infrastructure of online teaching technologically, not just pedagogically. So some good news. The center had been established at UCA for over 25 years. So we were definitely well known and well established. But as happens at many teaching centers, at least in the United States that I'm familiar with, we tend to attract the same 50 to 100 faculty across all of our programming. You tend to see the same 50 to 100 faculty members at your events. So I could look at this situation as a challenge, and of course it was a challenge, but I also wanted to look at it as an opportunity. And I don't know if you caught that on the title slide, my credentials include a PhD in leadership, but also there was the abbreviation APR. And for those who aren't familiar with that, that means accredited in public relations. So it would help for you to know that I have a 20+ career as a professor in public relations and have led the center for 7 years now. And I've truly engaged my crisis communication background to see this as an opportunity to both broaden and deepen our center's footprint. Could it be possible to use our response to a fully online pivot as a way to just have a lot more influence on our campus? Because you can imagine that the 100 faculty who come to our events and programs are probably the 100 who need it the least. And the ones we've never seen are the ones who probably could use the support the most. So just to be clear, our center is primarily there to support pedagogical development in online and face-to-face course modalities. but we also provide a tremendous amount of technical support in collaboration with our instructional technology division. So there were a couple layers to our response. And of course, the first layer was what we had to do immediately. And in addition to what's listed here, I can remember that we were given notice on a Tuesday or Wednesday that our campus was going to close the following week on Monday and Tuesday so that everyone could move home and move their offices home. And then we were going to resume in a fully online modality the following Wednesday. So we had basically from Wednesday to Friday of that week to do any last minute face to face training that we could possibly provide. And so we went into a complete full response mode. We offered training basically all day, every day for that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on both the technology tools and how to begin to imagine taking a course that's already 2/3 of the way through a semester and finish that course fully online. Also, be aware that at that time, we were not a Zoom campus. We had a tool called Blackboard Collaborate that is not near as robust or technically responsive as Zoom. And so we also were having to make people aware of how to even use a video conferencing platform if they were choosing to do synchronous instruction versus moving to asynchronous instruction. And I would guess most faculty that semester did do synchronous instruction, tried to quote hold class online live, but again, using a tool they weren't very familiar with that wasn't also extremely robust. So, what we began doing immediately following the close of campus is that we pretty much started with a two-tier response. We immediately began building out our online resources, and I've got a screenshot to show you of that in just a moment, along with the URL in case you would like to visit. It's uca.edu/CETAL, CETAL, and everything that I'm going to talk about is off of that webpage. So we began building out an instructional continuity section to our website. So this was about the immediate response from March until the end of the spring semester. We began holding daily online virtual office hours from 8 to 4:30 every single day of the work week, Monday to Friday, where faculty could log on at any time, and one or more of us would be available to help them with their questions as they were preparing materials for online instruction. We continued actually with those office hours. Even though there were only 4 of us, at least one of us was available at every minute from 8 to 4:30 Monday through Friday from March until the end of the December fall 2020 semester, which was an incredible amount of responsiveness. In our online materials, we had to start from the very basic foundations of online instruction. We started with what is your LMS? How do you navigate Blackboard? How do you put grades in the Grade Center? We had a tremendous number of faculty who had never explored our test security solution, which at the time was Respondus. And so here they are going to have to prepare to give exams, including final exams, with technology that they have never even seen before. So we created short, UCA specific videos walking faculty through all of these technology tools. So from the Grade Center to Respondus to Blackboard Collaborate, which was at the time our tool that we now use Zoom to do our video conferencing. And I just want to point out at this point that we also had access to Google Meet because we are a Google campus. And I'm going to say that choices are a mixed blessing because we ended up having to support faculty who moved to Google Meet as well as Collaborate. And then in the summer of 2020, move everyone over by supporting the use of Zoom in place of those tools. So that has been quite the learning curve. We also had to walk faculty through how to record instructional videos using a tool that again, none of them had ever used called Kaltura. That included teaching them how to record the video, how to upload the video, how to caption the video for ADA compliance purposes, which, as you can imagine, would not be the first thought of a faculty member in a crisis response. And we had to work with our campus partners. We worked closely, as I said, with IT and specifically with a team in IT called the Instructional Technology Team. And then we also had to work with our library faculty and our disability resource center so that we could make sure that our students who had accommodations were given newly imagined accommodations related to being fully online. You can imagine the complexity that entailed. And I'll just say at this point that I'm thankful that we were a campus culture where we had already, under my leadership over the last 7 years, worked to tear down the silos that tend to plague higher education. Our campus, like many, had people working in different divisions who necessarily did not collaborate regularly, and that had totally changed. By 2020, these offices were not just collaborating, but we were friends. And so there was a real relief there that we weren't going to have to worry about turf wars or territory disputes, because it was all hands on deck to try to get the faculty supported so that our students could finish the semester and learn what they needed to learn. And then in the summer of 2020, we moved to creating online resources, and particularly a guide for how to build a fully online course, depending on what modality the faculty member would choose. So with that, I wanted to just show you a couple of screenshots. Again, you'll see at the bottom, not on this screen, but the next two, the URLs for finding these resources on our website. But here's our instructional continuity page that was started immediately in March 2020. And then here is the beginning of our online course building guide, which I'm very proud of what we did here. We gave folks a complete resource that was UCA specific that talked about misperceptions related to online teaching. It gave best practices related to universal design for learning. And then it went through what we call the backwards design process, which is how you design a fully online course for fall 2020, which was what most of our faculty were focused on, whether that was going to have some synchronous components or be fully asynchronous, that guide would be a one-stop shop for our faculty to use in doing so. So there was a longer term response, and we had, I guess you would call it the triage of the late spring and summer. But as we moved from summer into fall, what I began to see is the fruit of our investments, because I think most of you can empathize with this. But when we were working from home in the spring and summer, I was on Zoom meetings, many meetings that I would not have been in except for the pandemic, 6 to 7 hours in a row every single workday. And these meetings were all about preparing for the fall, because we knew we were going to be fully online, with very few exceptions for fall. And so we moved from that into the fall semester, and we knew we wanted to take time to check on our students. We're a very student-centered campus. Maybe a lot of places say that, but I feel like the University of Central. And so, as one example of many projects CT was asked to lead, we were asked to lead a campus-wide student focus group project to gather feedback from our students on what was happening during the pandemic. And I should say that I was involved in the summer in a survey project, and there was a phone calling campaign as well that I was not as directly involved in. And we were hearing some very mixed feedback from our students, some very negative experiences all the way to some extremely positive ones. And so we followed that survey research up with a focus group study. We ended up doing 28 focus groups with students ranging from first year students to graduate students. And we prepared a pretty significant report that's on our website as well, that detailed what our students were struggling with. And we certainly found that while faculty were still struggling with technical support and technical savvy related to navigating all the tools and options, that we definitely had to turn our attention more in the fall and now in the spring semester that just finished to pedagogical support. That we needed to help our faculty be more deliberate and proactive in the effective design of these online and hybrid instructional modalities. And so that is what we shifted our attention to, much more from a let's put out these resources that a lot of people can benefit from, back down to one-on-one consultations with a tremendous number of faculty, just trying to help them solve the challenges or navigate the challenges to achieve the learning objectives for their courses. So what you'll see on the following slide here is that this enabled us, because of the credibility that we established through the spring, summer, and fall of 2020, we were able to really revisit our pre-pandemic initiatives with increased credibility and sponsorship from the president and the vice president of academic affairs. In the spring of this year, we were able to go back to an initiative we were starting before the pandemic on introducing a quality rubric for online instruction to the campus. And we have chosen, which would be a topic for another talk, the Oscar rubric, which is the Online SUNY Course Quality Review rubric. And that is a rubric that we have rolled out to about half the departments in our campus, and I think had a completely different level of not just a positive, but certainly more sense of urgency in the responses that we got from our faculty, because they've all been forced to teach online. And prior to the pandemic, maybe 10 to 15% of our faculty were teaching substantively online. And when that changed from 10 to 15% to 100%, we had a different level of buy-in that allowed us to really leverage some momentum that we are taking with us into this summer. So one of the things that we'll be doing this summer, and if you don't know this tool, there is a tool that Blackboard has developed called Ally. It is a tool that helps students with, well, all students because of Universal Design for Learning, but certainly students with disabilities, to get course content, online course content, in a variety of formats. So one of the formats, for example, that you can do is you can download course content as MP3s and listen to them, which, as you can imagine, doesn't just help students with, let's say, a visual disability, but with any sort of processing style that would prefer to hear content and not just see content. So the tool that we purchased, Ally, will help us on the student side, but it also helps us to audit every single course we offer, whether it's hybrid or fully online, to give it a course accessibility score to see how compliant it is with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the act that it prescribes what courses must do to be fully accessible to students across a spectrum of visual, hearing, and learning disabilities. And so we're poised this summer to review about 100 fully online courses that were not online before the pandemic. That's why we're starting with them this summer, so that we can get them 100% compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And just to show you, this is a screenshot from our Oscar page. We have a full web page where we've built out what Oscar is, how the process works at UCA, and we are beginning to work with our faculty on these course quality reviews. And then you'll see on this slide a screenshot of the start to our accessibility and compliance checklist. I'm sure many of my American peer institutions are also grappling with how to continue to be fully compliant with the ADA. And one of the things that we have benefited from actually in the pandemic is that it became apparent that we were behind in making sure all of our courses had a process for being reviewed for ADA compliance. And now going forward, we have a very robust process for making sure that our courses are in compliance. And of course, as you know, it's not just about being in compliance with the law, it's about setting up every student as a learner who can fully succeed, because we've removed barriers that don't need to be in these online courses. And if you notice here, there's actually 8 standards. We've boiled down the Americans with Disabilities Act to 8 standards that are on the webpage that's linked here. But the very first standard that we listed as a compliance issue is not accessibility specifically, but is more a law related to federal distance education, that universities in the United States are not able to offer correspondence courses and therefore must continue to have regular and substantive instructor to learner interaction. And that is something that we now check and address in every course. So it's also allowing us to go through some of our courses where there's a lot of textbook materials and standardization, and make sure that instructor presence and instructor student interaction is in every course, even if that course relies a lot on third-party materials. So, one of the wonderful things that happened as a result of the crisis, at least from our perspective, is that we were renamed from the Center for Teaching Excellence to the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Academic Leadership. And I was very grateful to be promoted to an assistant provost of teaching and academic leadership. And what that means, it's not just a title change, it's a recognition of a much more elevated role that the center has on our campus and will continue to have going forward. And what that offered for us, as that crisis, we hope and believe, is coming to a close, is that we received the funding that we've been wanting for about 5 years to finally offer a week-long inaugural Summer Teaching Excellence Institute. We've accepted 25 faculty from all our colleges and from all our ranks, from teaching assistant to full professor, into this week-long immersive experience where we will focus on 3 areas, actually 4 areas. One, the unique qualities of UCA students. Two, the science of learning and memory, which a lot of our faculty are super interested in. Three, inclusive pedagogies. And finally, what we're calling socio-emotional skills, which really relates to the final point on this slide, which is we are continuing, this is at least our 4th year, to offer a leadership retreat annually for our academic chairs and directors. And this year, our theme is inspired by the pandemic, and that is, how do we cultivate emotionally adept leadership? How do we help our students, ourselves, and each other to process and regroup from the emotionally draining experiences that we've shared over the past 14 months? And then how do we move forward into what I love one person called not a new normal, but the next normal? There's no going back. So, what does it look like in the next normal for us to be emotionally adept as educators, and also then help our students to become emotionally adept learners? Because we know that that socio-emotional skill set is so critical in addition to cognitive skills. So, with that, I will conclude by saying that it certainly was a crisis that created opportunities. I can't imagine any other way, because this is the way that we have chosen to respond. And so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and leave a few minutes for hopefully, some questions and responses.
Thank you very much, Amy. Very, very interesting indeed, and really insightful. The ally stuff is really interesting. I know that some of us use it in the UK as well, and I'm sure much wider than that. Colleagues, please do put some questions in the Q&A. But in the meantime, I just wanted to ask you, Amy, it sounds like you embarked on a fairly significant training program for your colleagues. I can't even begin to imagine that, actually, in terms of what you did in such a short period of time. Have you done any evaluative work in terms of, how they've responded to that? Has it changed their attitudes towards online learning? I imagine you still have a spectrum of kind of interest, if you like, but I'd be interested to hear that.
We have done some evaluation. We still have more to do. Now that the spring semester is done, we will move into sending out some more what we call summative evaluation, right, to just look at the year or the 14, 15 months as a whole. But yes, I think a lot of faculty have, one of the feedback that we've gotten is that a lot of faculty now have a much deeper appreciation for how difficult online teaching is. Historically, online teaching was kind of received with skepticism. And I don't believe that most of our faculty are skeptical anymore. I think they are more daunted, which is probably appropriate, right? To go into the design of online courses with a little bit of humility, that this is harder, actually, in a lot of ways than what we do in a face-to-face modality.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about students, Amy? Because you did that original sort of survey, didn't you, to get sort of sense from students as to how they were feeling and how they were reacting. I'm sure many of us have done similar things to that. And again, you see this whole spectrum, don't you, a really polarized kind of view. I just wondered if there had been any further kind of surveying of students to find out how things may have changed in that way as well.
Well, I think the focus group study was our follow-up, right? And we did that in the late fall and reported those results in the early spring. And one of the huge takeaways is, and this is what led to us focusing so much on emotionally adept instruction and emotionally adept leadership, is that we found that students were experiencing faculty at two extremes. One extreme were the faculty who seemed to not have very good boundaries and were capitulating to students in too many areas and were feeling really burned out. So we had the burnout on the faculty part. And then I think students sensing they weren't really getting the rigor that they would normally get. But then on the other end of the spectrum, and this was particularly true in STEM, as you can imagine, in the sciences, you had faculty who acted like the pandemic wasn't even going on. And so they're so concerned about holding to their rigor, which we appreciate, that they lacked compassion, or at least they lacked the conveying of compassion. And so one of the things we needed to continue to address, which is what we're doing this summer, is that you can have high standards and have high compassion. And our expression for that at UCA is caring isn't caving. You do not have to cave in order to express that you care about students. And that's apparently a really hard paradox for a lot of individuals to learn.
Fascinating. I've got a question here from Christine, which is, how did you get the institution to recognise the need for a more senior level of leadership in this area, or did it just happen naturally as a result of the circumstances?
Yeah. Both, I think. First of all, we had offered as a center 4 years ago to start hosting and leading a chairs retreat, because I have a background in leadership, had taught in our PhD in leadership. And so but I certainly didn't lead the retreat. I got our chairs and our directors on board to plan and lead these retreats. So we had been doing those for about 4 years and had started doing quite a bit of coaching and consulting with individual departments, even helping some departments with mission, vision, values. And so I think there was already quite a bit of momentum. And then when the pandemic hit and other departments seemed to kind of crash and burn, seriously, I mean, they just seemed to be unable to react with urgency. And my team, and again, I think it has part to do with that we were really tight. The four of us are a tight-knit team, and we understand urgency, that we just kind of became the de facto leaders on a lot of initiatives. For example, we built and led the project to create a fully online student orientation. We are not a student-facing office, and they didn't have anyone else with the skill set technically and the cachet relationally to bring the group together that would have to come together to make a fully online orientation. And we pulled it off. And I think when you pull off enough things, maybe eventually people go, maybe I should, let people know that we see what this group is doing.
Very well done. We've got one final question, and it's from Raj. What kind of feedback did you get from using Ally, both from the faculty and students?
And again, remember, we're just starting to implement Ally, but to the groups of faculty that we presented it to, they're very impressed and also extremely intimidated. As you can imagine, faculty are not adept at terms like alternative descriptions on photos, or what we call alt text. So we start throwing around these terms and the faculty quickly become intimidated. So we're going to really have to partner with those faculty. It's going to be a heavy lift this summer. I'm going to stay in my little happy place of post-COVID for another day or two. But when I come back from my vacation, that is going to be the next heavy lift for our center.
I can imagine. Well, thank you so much, Amy. That was a really, really very, very interesting presentation. Lots of food for thought from us.